interesante. Hablamos sobre el cerebro creativo y tenemos subtítulos en castellano, gracias a Daniel. Así que aunque hablamos inglés, seguramente que podéis entender todo. So we will now change the language to English, and we will continue with the roundtable discussion, The Creative Brain. And it's my great pleasure to invite two panelists here, Professor Fredrik Ullén. He's the director of the Department of Cognitive Neuropsychology at the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics in Frankfurt in Germany. Just come over. In addition, he is a professor of cognitive neuroscience at the Department of Neuroscience at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. And he's also a classical pianist who has recorded with several labels. And at the end, you will hear him playing, so that will be fascinating. And then another panelist, warmly welcome, Dr. Alex Galvez-Paul. And just come over. He's an assistant professor at the psychology department of the University of the Balearic Islands. And he also works with the Department of Clinical and Movement Neuroscience at the University College London, and he's also a photographer. So we have a quite nice combination of people who really dedicate time to both science and arts. And I hope we will have a very fruitful conversation. And obviously, at the end, we will leave time for questions. So, and you can obviously ask in English or in Spanish. So if there are some topics we touch, just note down the questions you have in mind, and we will leave nicely time for them. But thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
Great pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and for traveling from Mallorca, from Frankfurt, so it's really nice.
My pleasure, yeah.
I would like to hear a little bit about your reflections on the documentary, because I think it was touching many topics. We will talk more throughout our conversation.
Shall I start? Well, first of all, I think it was a very beautiful film, fantastic pictures and fantastic materials, and I guess one reflection I had was how complex this question is about the origins of music, and I really liked one main theme there, which was, I think, emphasized by Tecumseh Fitch, that we need perhaps not think about this as being just one thing. I mean, for instance, this idea about that music serves a function, music and related behaviors like dance serve this function of bonding people together, increasing group cohesion. I don't think that idea contradicts that once music is in place has a capacity, we can also use it for sexual selection, to sort of, for fitness to play and this kind of thing. So that was one aspect that I liked very much. And then, of course, I guess it was also very obvious that it's difficult to tell in the end. Perhaps we will never know for sure which of these functions and what actually happened. So, but it was a very nice film. I really enjoyed seeing it.
Thank you, thank you. I also was thinking the same aspect of that. We can't really explain creativity with one motivation, because the creativity is everywhere. It's not only on the dance class or on the music class or once you go to a concert, but it's in our everyday life constantly. But Alex, what did you think about it?
Bon vespre, hola, buenas tardes. So actually, when I was watching the movie, I have many revelations, because for someone that actually works in a laboratory setting where you're actually doing also research, there are many concepts that are important and that are also embedded into music. For instance, there is the concept of synergy, how we interact with others. There is the concept of how we move our bodies. There is also how we observe others' bodies and we respond to those bodies. There is producing the sound, noting your own face, how it changes. And right now, actually, when I'm speaking, I'm also noticing the mood that is in the room. And all those things have to be computed when actually you are doing music or singing or moving. One of the things that was actually that I would like to highlight during about the movie is also body movement. My research concerns a lot about body movement, about how we perceive others and how we move our own body. And one of the things that this movie is the origins of music, but one of the headlines that could go there also is about dancing, because there were many images and bits of the film that actually were related to dancing and relating also to others through this process.
Yeah, that's really nice. Actually, that's what I spoke with Daniel earlier, that often somehow music and dance are thought as something separate, but that's really not the case, because already like when we're playing an instrument, that's rhythmical movement, so that's dance as well, and also we have rhythmical movement in our everyday life, like walking and so forth. So I think they're in a way inseparable, and what also we know from neuroscience, that just listening to music activates our movement-related brain regions. So it's really nice that these, both the movement and music were like dealt with together. But since this documentary was a lot about science and arts, and I know you both work in that field as well, it would be really interesting to hear a bit, how did you come up to work in this field? How did you combine, or where was the kind of the initial starting point, and how did you start to see the connections between art and science? Because usually they are considered somehow separate.
Okay, I can start.
I can break the rhythm.
All right. Yeah. No. Well, that I can say rather clearly. I had my sort of scientific childhood doing rather different things. Classical electrophysiology, trying to understand certain groups of nerve cells in the brainstem and how they function in locomotion and things like this. So it was really basic neuroscience. After that, I really thought once and twice and thrice about how to sort of combine these two parts of my life, the music and the science. And this was really the time when the neuroscience of music was also, started to be established as a discipline. So, yeah, no, the answer is really that it was a way of combining these two passions in my life in a hopefully satisfying, well, it's very satisfying for me anyway. And I think also the sort of, at least it's obvious that my musical background is useful for the kind of research we do. And now and then I also imagine that studying these things scientifically is somewhat useful when you work with the piano. But above all, it's of course it's a privilege really to be able to use your brain in these two different ways, both of which are kind of creative and very enjoyable.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Alex.
So in my case, I will say that actually I was doing just research in London. And at some point I realized that I was not able to explain some of the scientific concepts to family, friends, people that were not really researchers. So what I started to do is to do some sort of new photography that I was using during my explanations or the way I was explaining research, but just by using these images. It's very difficult to explain to people that are not studying the human brain, for instance, sometimes how the brain works. You just put a picture of the brain, one area that has a little blue, a little reddish, and you say, this part of the brain is doing that. But that doesn't really make it. It doesn't make a very strong resonance with the person. So I just started to create images and videos and do exhibitions in different places where I was using these sort of artistic images to convey scientific concepts. And in that way, try to get closer to non-scientific public, and to break this sort of boundary between the knowledge that we are saving in the lab sometimes in the scientific papers and with this kind of wording that we use, and try to break that boundary and try to share the knowledge. First of all, starting with my parents or my friends, and that was the beginning of it.
Oh, that's really sweet. I also remember, like, before I combined art and science, I had like these two separate lives, and I somehow didn't even feel the need to combine them, because I was often when I was doing a really physical dance training, so the body was hurting and in bruises, so I felt like, okay, now my body needs rest, so now I use my head, I kind of dedicate my time for science. And then the other way around, like after working hard cognitively, I really felt that I could allow my mind to relax in these like creative practices. So it was really like two separate lives, but then actually it was these neuroscientific results related to music which kind of opened me this field of neuroscience of dance and creativity, and then it was really interesting to start bringing them together.
If I just can add one thing, and that's sort of apart from this personal thing, it's of course also the case, I think, that this field is extremely dynamic, extremely interesting, and really a sort of hot spot within the cognitive sciences today. And I mean, a lot of the people working with me are actually not having a background in the arts, and they are more interested in how the human brain functions in general. And if for that as well, looking at phenomena like dance and dancers and musicians can be very helpful as models or sort of windows through which we can understand cognition in general. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, yeah, the arts is kind of a tool to understand the brain in a larger context. When we say that we study creativity, I would be interested in like hearing your opinions. Like, what is it actually what we study? Like, what is the creativity in a scientific context?
I will say that creativity is trying to break regularities. And something that came out in the documentary is also that we are very good at picking up regularities. So for instance, if I do this rhythm, like something, you already did, like, you already pick up the first regularity, and actually when I stop my finger, you notice that there was a change there. This is something that happens in all humans. We try to make meaning of everything that is out there, and we are trying constantly to find these regularities. When the regularity is broken, there is what we call a prediction error. There is a mistake in that prediction, and that actually is also very rewarding. So actually, we find attractive or rewarding to find regularities in the environment, for instance, in a dance, in a sound, in my speech, in my tone, but also when these regularities are starting to be boring, we also like to break it down and to do something new. And to make it something new, you need to be somehow, I will say, creative. And it's in this search of creativity that we enjoy doing lots of things in our daily life.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, no, but I think that's an interesting, very general take on it, and I think it fits very well with this common definition that creativity is, okay, on the one hand you have novelty, breaking patterns, figuring out ideas and products that have not seen before. On the other hand, it has to be somehow meaningful or useful, or I mean, that would be a very generic definition of creativity. What we do in practice is to look at musical improvisation as a kind of tool or model for understanding how the brain generates new meaningful materials then. And then we also look a little bit on real life creative achievement and what lies behind that. But when it comes to brain studies, it's mainly about improvisation.
Interesting. A little bit related to the improvisation. I remember when I heard for the first time of this field, neuroscience of creativity, that was 15 years ago. And then I started to read, like, how do they actually study this? And there was one, like, let's say, legendary study setup or study design that the participants had to name as many different uses for a brick as possible. Yeah. And obviously some people may say, like, you can build a wall, you can build a house, you can build an office, you can build a warehouse. So there are a lot of different functions, or let's say a lot of different ways to use the brick, but the function is the same. Then there were the other people who say, like, okay, yeah, you can build a wall, you can break a window, you can put it on top of the paper so that they don't go with the wind. You can grind it and then mix the powder with water and paint with that.
Train karate.
or you can make a vase and put flowers. So then I'm interested in this kind of the divergent thinking. So you see a lot of kind of open-ended answers versus this kind of specialized thinking that there is like very elaborated one answer. So I think often in natural sciences we tend to have this one elaborated answer, and then this is, whereas in art it's more like these open-ended questions and several answers. So I often see this also as a contradiction when we try to combine science and arts, that sometimes we don't speak the same language. I don't know, does this like give some reflections on you?
Yeah, I guess I could say something. I mean, it's absolutely true that these divergent thinking tests, as you say, they are valid. I mean, they predict real-life creative achievement, even if you include a lot of other variables. I'm talking about pure statistical studies now, even if you include like training or convergent thinking ability, then general intelligence and other things. I mean, that's an interesting component of it, which probably has to do with sort of your flow of ideas, how rich that is, and how easy it is perhaps for you to see unusual associations and such things. And one thing we will look at there now during the coming years is actually, so what's the importance of, so how general is this in a sense? I mean, is it necessarily so that someone who is very divergent or very fantasyful in one domain is that in other domains as well? So we will try to develop a sort of brick test, but for music, to see how that works.
Yeah, and now also when I work at the in Zurich in a lab, we focus on learning. So also related to this like specialist or generalist kind of thinking. So we all the time try to think like, how should we teach the students? What kind of knowledge, what kind of brain functions do we need in the future? So it looks like it's some kind of combination of specialists. So we are able to teach ourselves like very precise technical skills, or when you play an instrument, you need to be very, very skilled with that. But at the same time, we need this open-mindedness. We need the kind of the generalist approach that we can jump to another topic, or we can jump to another point of view kind of quickly. But then what it looks like it's happening when we kind of develop this expert's brain, we develop more automatic connections. So then one input leads to kind of automatic conclusion, which is beneficial in specialists, but at the same time we are closing some gates on the way. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that, like how to kind of combine this very fine skill learning, for example, in arts, and at the same time keep the adaptability to the moment at hand.
Yeah, I think that in that regards, it's quite important your experiences in daily life, and also now I get kind of more sentimental, let's put it that way. But I think that it's also important to believe in yourself. At the very end of the film, or the movie, or the documentary, actually they say something, even people that doesn't feel or think about themselves that actually they can perform in music, they can actually do great things. They can follow the tone, the frequencies, learn new rhythms, follow the pace, recognize different songs, and so forth. If you ask many people whether or not they can do some drawing or learn to play the piano and so forth, there are many people that very quickly they will have this very fast reaction that will say, no, me, never. I mean, that's impossible. And I think that was something that we have to change, maybe in our society or in our kids, is to try to believe in ourselves, work a bit that self-esteem. That is actually the ground, is the base for developing new skills. Something that is very important also is that, of course, we see experts, musicians, sportmen on TV, radio, YouTube, Twitch, whatever. And the truth is that there is a lot of work behind. We think, oh my goodness, this person is so creative. But behind that creativity, that sometimes looks like something magical, something mystical, there is a lot of work. There is learning new skills. Maybe it's actually changing the way your brain works. And that doesn't happen by magic many times. That happens because you put many hours. For instance, sometimes, just talking about myself in this case, I was not very good in some skills, in the way I memorize information, or I attend to things, or the way I speak English, for instance. And what I had to do is to actually just learn it. I was not maybe more creative than now, but I learned new skills, I believe in myself, and some people will define me more now as creative person, when it's just a matter of believing and trying and putting some effort in that aspect. Yeah?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I guess this is also a trend which has increased more and more in later years now. As human knowledge sort of grows, people have to, in a sense, I guess, at least in the professional work, become more specialized. But I think it's definitely important to keep this joy of amateur engagement in various things. And although I guess it's difficult to be a sort of professional polymath these days, it's still...
Yeah, where the magic happens is in the uncertainty.
Yes.
Many times where you learn, I mean, the goal is not just to reach the mountain, it's everything that happens during the path. And probably you as a professional, you feel
sure.
this.
It's true.
So then I wanted to hear a bit, Fredrik, I know that you have been studying a lot expertise. and expertise in music. So I would be interested in hearing a little bit more from that aspect to creativity.
Yeah, so I mean that's been really an interesting journey. It's something we started with in earnest like 10 years ago, I guess, or so. And of course, we look at music because we are interested in music, but we also see it as a way of understanding specialization and skill learning in general. And what we wanted to do, which hadn't really been done at the time, is to try and understand also how genes and environment play together. It's kind of dance or counterpoint, really. It play together when it comes to becoming an expert. And I think that's been really a very interesting line of research for me. It has changed my view of expertise, and I guess perhaps had an impact on the field as well. So I mean, okay, what can I say? I mean, we of course practice, as you said, is one very important component, but it's also clear that it's not the only thing, and also how you practice and how much you practice, and the sort of relations between practice and other things such as interest and skills and so on. All of this is moderated by genes in a very interesting way, and I think combining the techniques of twin modeling with new analysis of genotype data that we have now is really very interesting. I'm looking forward to sort of addressing new questions there. And I think it's, for me, really a very nice example of also of how studying music can teach us something much more general than just about music. So yeah, we do this in a long collaboration with the Swedish Twin Registry then in Stockholm.
Yeah, and I think these results could be used for these like everyday dancers or musicians who say that they cannot. Yeah. So then like kind of what part is nature and what part is nurture, which is this famous dilemma in neuroscience. So I think, okay, if the genes play a role, but then can anyone still, just by dedicating time, can they learn certain level of skills in different creative practices?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that all human variation depends to some extent on genes and to some extent on the environment. So it's to the point that it's almost not interesting to address that particular question anymore. The interesting question to me is really how these things interact, how they work together.
And does some personality traits play a role?
Yeah, well, Alex was into this about openness. I think that's the most important personality trait for creativity and musical interest.
Yeah. Also, there is one new thing that is actually didn't appear that much in the documentary because it's a field that has been developing in the last couple of years, no, maybe 10 years now. So normally, if you go into psychology degree, first course, they teach you that, or we study the human mind in different ways. One of them, or three big ways, is one in which we study the brain, how it works to perceive the stimuli in our surroundings, the sounds, the faces, the odors, and so forth, or the touch. Another way, and that is actually called exteroception, how we perceive the outside world. Then there is the other one that is called proprioception, which is how you feel your own body in space. And then there is this new one that is actually has been kind of exponentially growing. That is the study of how the brain processes the internal body, the heart, the lungs, the liver, the blood, and so forth. This is called interoception. And for the last 20 years or so, this field has been growing a lot, and we are now doing studies in which we show that also experts, for instance, in dancing or music and so forth, they have a different way to actually their own body from the inside. This is something that normally happens in the unconscious. You are not really aware of when sometimes your heart is beating, or you don't really pay attention to your lungs, how they breathe in or breathe out. But it makes a difference for people who are really sensitive and they have a special sensibility towards these insides of the body. And now we are actually realizing that this is very important. So in the documentary, you see all the time people dancing and the brain and so forth, but if we do it maybe in a couple of years later, now in time, it will be very interesting to put in those videos and in those pictures also this part of the body, for instance, the cardiovascular system. Because the main function of the brain, and this is the first and base of everything, is that actually the brain has to keep the body alive. So if it doesn't monitor how the body works, nothing works. So once you have this stability, you can start developing new things like language, communicating, and creativity. But you have to establish the base. And in this establishment of the base and the contact between the brain and the body from the inside out is actually very important, and it looks like it's slightly different for experts in different fields, including music and dance.
This is interesting because I work a lot through movement and creative movement with people who don't have background in dance, or they might be recovering from brain-related illness like stroke or MS disease, Parkinson's disease. And usually what I start from is exactly this kind of interoception. So instead of trying to learn some steps, I kind of bring the attention inwards and kind of find the balance, notice how the breathing works, and then kind of start to build from there. Often I also add another layer of activating imagination. So we might imagine some kind of nature environment, for example, the morning mist, and we really feel it with the skin. So I have noticed that this kind of building from the inside has been really helpful also to enhance the so-called external skills.
Yeah, one example will be, very easy. If now I was too nervous and too anxious about being here on the stage, and I will be noticing my heart pounding too strong, I will not be able to speak, for instance. So that is just one example of how important it is to actually have some aware or have some attention that is actually regulated in a point that keeps a balance when actually you can perform nicely. When you achieve a performance or an act that is actually functioning at an optimal level, and also that comes from the inside. So one interesting aspect also, again, the movie and about professional musicians and so forth, is that actually when they dance and when they play, or for instance, even in acting, in actors and so forth on the stage, people also are synchronizing. And they don't synchronize only the movements that you see, like I move that way and you also move that way. What they are doing also is that they are synchronizing the respiration, the heartbeat, even the sudoration, and so forth. So there is a true alignment, a synchronization that is coming in many layers, even the invisible ones, the ones that you don't see maybe because you cannot see the heart of the other, but you can see the way they breathe. And that actually makes that the feeling, many times when we are performing or trying to be creative, is actually going beyond what we can perceive. It's like the true colors of cognition actually also entail the physiology from the inside, not only what we can see in that regard.
This is interesting, and it brought me to think about this one specific study where they actually noticed that even the brain waves synchronize when we are, for example, playing instruments together or moving together, and it looks like this synchronization stays also after we have finished this, like, let's say, simple rhythmical movement together. And then the people who had this kind of unconscious movement in synchrony after the actual task was finished, they reported less social anxiety. So then also this kind of movement and doing together might be one very good way in creating the sense of community and really reducing anxiety in people, which is maybe important to keep in mind considering the time where we are living in, where we tend to be very isolated. And I don't know to what extent this kind of synchronization happens through virtual interaction. I don't know how much that has been studied.
No, I don't know either, but I really believe this sort of touches the core, perhaps, of music. I'm getting back to the audience of it, this synchronization and building group cohesion. That I think there is rather strong data also.
In that case, if I can comment of it, first about the synchronization, people think that the more synchronization is always the better, but that's not true. For instance, if you are having an argument with your boyfriend or your dad is actually lecturing you, it's not very good idea to synchronize. I mean, you don't want to get all those to, okay, I'm yelling at you and I'm yelling at you also. Maybe that's not a good synchronization. So the alignment and the synchronization is not always the good point. And even imagine that you have to dance. Imagine that now we dance all together and we have to maybe make a performance. Maybe one of the dancers has to actually do different movement. So if you align to the point that you are doing the same movement, that's not good because you have to do a different one. So it makes also sense to actually comment that maybe the synchronization is good depending on the goal that you have. And then if I can comment on the new technologies, Actually, there are a couple of studies that have been coming out now because the COVID, the pandemic, and so forth, and it looks like there is some results that suggest that, that interacting or learning through, for instance, Zoom or the screens, or different screens of computer and so forth, is not the same as live. But I mean, it looks like something obvious, but now we have scientific data also for that.
And they have noticed the same also in dance-related studies, though. So the kind of it's called corticospinal excitability. So the connection between the brain and the body, it's not as strong if we watch a dancer on the screen than if we watch a real dancer. And in my own study, I noticed also that if we watch a real dancer or dancer on the video and the moving stick figure, like kind of simple avatar, the brain doesn't activate as strongly with the avatar than with the somehow real.
Yeah, I think also language learning in children has been shown that it's a big difference if you have a real teacher sitting with the group.
So I was interested what you said about this synchronization and not going into the same rhythm necessarily, because I think why we have this skill to go into the rhythm of the other person is that we can predict better what the other one is aiming to do. So if we think way back, maybe in potentially violent situations, it's better that we are also in this same kind of rhythm, so we are able to either fight or flight.
But maybe just one thought I got now, it could also be a kind of testing ground, right? I mean, if you're going out in warfare or something, you need to trust your fellows, and if you can synchronize in a sort of musical or dance context, then you have demonstrated that you are able to team up. Just a thought I got now.
Yeah, well, if we think where the meditation comes from, that also was like in the martial arts, kind of that we stay like calm and focused. But then I think that comes also down to the interoception, that if we are in an interactive situation with the environment and other people, we also, like, we don't lose the anchor within ourselves. And that's quite interesting. I think we're starting to run out of time, but there's one question I wanted to ask related to this, like, creativity and different kind of mental states. I know, Fredrik, you've been studying like pianists who kind of, they improvise from different kind of, let's say, motivation or source of inspiration. So what have you noticed in this kind of studies?
Yeah, that's was actually one of the things we started to look at, and I agree that it's a rather fascinating finding. So, well, in brief then, so we look at this pianists generally who perform simple improvisations on a little keyboard, and we scan their brains and we record their brain activity. And we and other labs have seen as well that skilled improvisers, so if you have a lot of background, not just in music, but really as a jazz player or as an improviser, you can perform this task with very little recruitment of these brain areas here in the frontal part of the brain, which are important for cognitive control and working memory and these kind of things. So it seems that even though it's a sort of, I think that's fascinating, even though it's a creative task, you come up with new things, you can do this in a sort of semi-automated way. And yeah, like you say, we also found that even in highly trained improvisers, if you give them a really strange improvisational task that they are not used to, they will again recruit more of this sort of cognitive control machinery. So we think of it as sort of two ways to creative thinking, or two strategies. Let's say that if you are trained in the task, if the task sort of allows for spontaneous associations, as musical improvisation does, then you might rely on this sort of bottom-up strategy and not recruit very much brain regions involved in cognitive control. But if that's not the case, or if the task really requires a lot of working memory, then you might have to use a more controlled top-down strategy. I guess that's the working theory anyway.
Yeah, which brings us to that the creative state is very versatile in the brain, and I think we need very many brain functions to kind of, from the starting point and from the ideas to actually get something concrete out, like being it the dance piece or musical piece or a documentary. So it really needs a lot of steps in between. I think we could open the conversation to the audience. Would someone have something to add or or ask?
¿Hay preguntas? Por ahí hay una pregunta. Por arriba, hacia la izquierda.
Do we have a mic out in the...
And there is another one here.
Okay.
Sí, y por supuesto se puede preguntar en castellano también.
Yeah, thank you very much for the conversation. I really like it, and I was thinking that creativity has to do also with the unexpected and allowing to introduce things that that they come from a different domain. As you did today, art and science is something that is pretty new and that nobody dared to put together years before. And so I think that this quality, this capacity of daring to think out of the box that we all have if we allow ourselves to be out of the linear thinking. That was just one of the things. And the other thing that came to me was that when I started to dance, they were using the word flocking. And I was completely amazed at the fact that flocking is what you mentioned when you are speaking about animals, when they are traveling together. And so we do have this capacity also of flocking. That means that you have like a peripheral perception. And I just wanted to know if there is more research about this capacity that we have. Thank you.
Flocking, so that you're kind of gathered in a group and you're able to move in a group, if I understood correctly.
Oh, sounds like an interesting new research topic.
Yeah, I've been experimenting it in practice.
No, sorry, I just don't know if it has been.
No, actually, so flocking, I don't know, actually. No, I have to say that, no, when I don't know it, I don't know it. Sorry, we can talk later, maybe after, and maybe we can reach some conclusion, but I will need at least 5 minutes to think about it, and we don't have the time.
And I think it's related again to the synchrony. So then somehow, because I've been doing this kind of flocking exercise in a dance class, and it's quite interesting that always the one who is in front is leading, and then if you turn the direction, there will be a new leader.
Yeah, like a sort of contagion of behavior. I guess it seems likely that it involves the mirror system anyway, right? I mean, you see other people performing, or perhaps many people performing the same act, and that will evoke some mirror activity in your own brain that...
And then what is fascinating in that practice is this embodied listening. So if you're there like trying to cognitively, rationally see the next movement, you're always late. But then if you're like embodied presence, you kind of, your body is in the, like doing the flocking in a way automatically. And I think that's also a skill you can train, and that would be actually very good practice for us to connect in a, let's say, intuitive way with other people. Yeah, maybe we can take another question. I think there was...
¿En español o en inglés? Venga,
Lo que quieras.
En español, va. Tengo dos preguntas. La primera de ellas es qué hay sobre la música y la gente mayor en cuanto al tema de terapias, de terapias sobre todo cognitivo, etc. Y la segunda ya más directa. ¿Qué hay de la música y el Alzheimer?
One about music and therapy, and another one about music, aging, and Alzheimer. If there is, ¿Y tu pregunta es si hay estudios o la pregunta va en alguna dirección en concreto?
¿En qué líneas se está trabajando?
Ah, okay. In what kind of research fields or advances are happening? No?
Yes. Yeah, maybe you want to comment, Hannah, or why not?
Yeah, we both can comment.
Yeah,
so you can
no,
go
but
ahead.
what I can say, I guess, is that well, number one, we are not working on this ourselves. So but I have looked, of course, at some reviews of the literature, and I think there are many conditions where you at least have promising studies where it seems that interventions with artistic ingredients, let's say, can have positive effects. And I know for anxiety problems, for depression, for pain conditions, and of course, what I think is rather obvious is that in rehabilitation after a stroke, for instance, where you have to perform a lot of exercises which are often very boring and you have to perform them very intensively, then if you can combine this with music and arts, it can increase your motivation and add a social component and all that. So my general picture of all this is, I guess, that I think it's promising, but also that more research is needed, larger studies and well-designed studies and all that.
Yeah, one important thing actually, not in Alzheimer, but before, actually something that really works to actually keep our brains young or younger is to actually move. You can move doing sports or move doing dancing, but everything that is some sort of cardiovascular exercise that raises your pulse a little bit through beyond what you are used to is actually, in principle, is really good, and is what comes across all the studies, regardless of the country or the institution or the article papers, is one of the things that actually predicts whether you are going to be aging in a good way or in not such a good way. So if you want to keep healthy and healthier and have your mind with full capacity for longer, try to exercise a bit. And probably dancing is a very good way, because the second predictor of how are you going to feel when you get to a certain age is actually the quantity of social interactions. And if you dance, probably you are interacting with others, with other people. You are keeping those social interactions, and you are also moving. So in this context, dancing or performing or acting or playing an instrument with others is a very good thing, because you put together these two things, being with others and moving your body. You keep these two things together, the likelihood of actually having a sort of dementia, being Alzheimer or others, probably decreases quite a lot, or quite a bit, and this, we know it for some time now, and it's out there, and that works.
Can I add something? Do we have time? Because I came to think about, but we have actually some recent results that are very relevant here, I think, and exciting to us, and that has to do with this psychological state flow that we are very interested in. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but flow is that state which I think most of us have experienced, which can happen when you do something actively, and it could be some artistic activity like drawing or playing an instrument, but it can be other things as well, playing a computer game and so on. And typical of flow then is that you are very focused on what you do, but it's not effortful. It's like an absorption in what you do, so it's really bottom-up driven. You don't have to make a mental effort to keep distractions away and so on and so forth. You are one with this task, really, and it's a very enjoyable state. Okay, and this is interesting, I think, in relation to arts, because they are very flow-promoting. Now, what we have seen recently, and this is really work in progress, but what we see then in these big registry studies that we perform with the twin registry is that people who have more flow in life, they report feeling better, so a higher level of psychological well-being and less problems with depression and these things, but it's also objectively the case that they have fewer diagnoses, so really fewer problems, less risk of a depression diagnosis. And now what's beautiful with having this kind of data in twins is that you can actually look a little bit closer at what is the sort of egg and what is the hen here, what is causing what. Because, of course, you can imagine that if you have problems with depression, you don't have the sort of energy to engage in flow-promoting activities. But this doesn't seem to be the case. And it's even the case that if you take identical twins who have the same genes and grow up in the same family, the twin who reports more flow in life has a lower risk of getting a diagnosis of depression than his or her co-twin who has less flow. And this, to me, is a sort of striking evidence for that we are dealing with a real effect here. So I think, to promote the arts a little bit, I think if we can promote flow, have more arts and flow in our lives, that's not just going to be nice in itself, but might have really good effects on overall health as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and maybe bring together a little bit of both of your comments as well as the question related to Alzheimer's disease. I think what we are talking here is enriched environment, and what animal studies show that kind of in adult brain, the only way to make lasting changes in the brain is through this kind of enriched environment. So there is physical, there is physicality, there is movement, but at the same time, there is like sensory enrichment. So there are sounds, there are things to play around, there are other, in this case, rats they can play with. So then it made me to think about these two very recent studies which were made in elderly. They were still healthy, so no memory-related illnesses yet, but then they were comparing dance to physical exercise, and the physical exercise was either walking, so it's also aerobic exercise as well as dance, but let's say more monotonic. And then they were also comparing to a stretching group, so there was movement, but that wasn't aerobic. And they actually noticed in both of these studies that the dance group was the only one who had enhanced white matter, and in the other one also enhanced gray matter. And then they also collected something, sorry Daniel for a difficult word, brain-derived neurotrophin factor. So they collected this kind of protein from the blood, and that protein is related to that how well new neurons are being created in the brain and new connections are being created. And so they noticed that the dance group had elevated levels of this protein, brain-derived neurotrophin factor. So it could kind of show that the dance exercise, when there are so many factors coming together, so there is physical exercise. I think very vigorous music playing will be the same, drumming, or so there is the physical exercise, there is the social interaction, and then there is kind of both cognitive and emotional engagement. So this would create like ideal conditions. However, it needs to be regular. So if you go once to a dance class, it doesn't really help. It would need to.
Absolutely.
I think we would have time for like one short, oh no more, okay. Thank you so much for good questions. We could keep this conversation going forever. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that. But thank you so much, everyone. Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Gracias.
Thank you. Very nice.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much, Fredrik. Now we will have some music. Fredrik will play for us. Would you like to tell a little bit what we will hear?
Yes, I thought I would play 3 brief pieces. All 3 are concert studies. I played two by Chopin, and then I thought it could be fitting on this occasion to end with one of the studies by George Ligeti. He has written a magnificent, I think, cycle of concert studies for the piano a number of decades ago. And the one I'm playing is called Autumn in Warsaw. This piece really explores rhythmical problems and rhythmical complexity in a very interesting way. So he calls it a tempo fugue. You will hear a melody first in one voice against the accompaniment, and then it comes in the second voice in a different tempo, so 2 different metrics beating against each other. Later on we have 3 voices and 4 voices until the complexity sort of grows so that the music collapses, starts again, and like this it moves on until the final disaster. Okay.
Thank you.